Welcome everybody to the next A-level GeogPod. So this GeogPod is focusing on diverse places inquiry question 4. So as I always do at the start of this session, this is not a replacement for your in-class learning. Please make sure you revisit your class notes, your textbook work, your independent work alongside this. This is not a standalone piece of recording. This goes alongside what you've already done. So, revision purposes only, please, folks. So, let's begin. What have we covered so far? Let's recap. So, we've covered inquiry question 1, 2, and 3. Inquiry question 4, the overriding question, is how successfully are demographic and cultural issues managed? And this is where we bring all of the previous learning together in EQ4. And if you'd like to pause the screen here and have a look at the EQ4 part of the specification on the right hand side, please feel free. Right, EQ4 started with the following focus: managing issues in diverse places. So there's 3 aspects to this. How is management assessed? How is social progress assessed? And how is assimilation assessed? Now you can see in the previous EQ, we've covered management, social progress, assimilation. We're bringing this together to look at how do we assess the success or evaluate the success of something that's taken place. So what you just started with was this question: how can we measure change? So create a mind map in your notes. And you've done this, again, revisit your notes, showing the indicators, data we can collect and assess to look at how a place has changed over time. Now, I'm going to pause here, actually. Great focus for the NEA, the non-examined assessment here. This is basically field work. You going out to a place that maybe has been regenerated and collecting data, primary data, to make a judgment, come to a conclusion about the success of regeneration of a place, combining that primary data with secondary data to help you make that judgment. So here you are just starting to mind map what could you actually collect. And there's loads of different things. And the list could be much larger than this. So you could look at employment figures. You could look at income figures and data. You could look at ethnic diversity data, life expectancy data, education data, house price data. And the word change infers you've got to look at this data over time as well to see how has employment rates changed in a particular place, to decide and analyze and evaluate if the change has been for the better or not. So again, it doesn't have to be numeric data. It doesn't have to be quantitative data. It can be picture-based here, so non-numeric. Again, we go back to some pictures of central London there before regeneration. On the right-hand side, you've got London Docklands after regeneration. And you can annotate and explain pictures as evidence and data as well. So here you can clearly see there's been regeneration, gentrification, there's new housing, job opportunities, investment, infrastructure improvements, and they're just a few. And you can unpick all of those from simple pictures. So what you now bring this into is the possible cultural and demographic issues requiring management. So in particular here, this diagram looks at the possible cultural and demographic issues that need to be managed if a change in a place is taking place. Under 4 main categories: ethnicity, population structure, migration, and quality of life. And these aren't standalone categories. These all link into each other. Managing migration will impact upon ethnicity and vice versa. Managing migration will impact on quality of life and vice versa. So remind yourselves of these key categories of cultural and demographic issues that require management in a place. And then you look at 7 steps to managing change. And you're given the categories for these steps here all jumbled up, and you were asked to put these 7 stages of managing change in a correct order. So again, revisit your class notes on this, and this is where you would have discussed and explained in more depth these different stages. So what you've got to put yourself into a situation is, say you were a lead part of the leading team of the London Docklands Development Corporation, even before the regeneration of the docks took place. You've got to identify the issue and its causal factors. So first of all, is there a problem that needs solving in a place? And if there is, what has caused that problem? There's no point in identifying a problem without identifying the cause. Once you've done that part, you go on to stage 2. This is what you forecast. And it says there, if and how the issue will change in the near future, were there to be no intervention. So London Docklands, if you revisit that case study, you know there was lots of issues in the Docklands as it declined. And there's lots of reasons for that decline as well, which you'd have discussed. What you'd need to decide as a team is, if you don't do anything, will the problems actually sort themselves out? Will it get better on its own? Now, if not, that's when you need to go to draw up a change management plan, setting out clear objectives. So what do you aim to do? The strategy and specific actions to solve the problems that you've identified that won't solve themselves. What you then do, and this takes a long time, this isn't going to happen overnight, you will implement the management plan. Now, this is where you can see there's a link back to the final stage here. So you implement your management plan, you start undertaking the measures, you start regenerating. As you go along, you need to monitor. Each of the parts of the plan needs a performance monitor. Is it on track? Is it working? Do we need to change it as we go along? So you're evaluating the performance of the plan as you go along before you get to the end. Now, if as part of that monitoring and evaluation you think, right, something's not working as it should do here, you need to revise. And that's where you return to the implementation stage. So these 7 steps in the management of change in urban areas, rural areas, any project, any place are vitally important for you to know. So what you'd have then done is apply these 7 steps of change to the London Docklands case study that you'd have built up. So what you've done in your margin is write out the 7 steps, and then you'd have, beside each of these, write detail for each of them on what happened in the London Docklands. So this is a very brief summary here. So pause your screen afterwards. Just gives you some examples of the 7 stages applicable to the London Docklands regeneration process. And then what would the indicators say if management is successful? So how do you actually know it's a success? And there's 2 main groupings here, looking at demographic indicators and economic indicators of change. So if we're looking at the demographics, we would look at the population. What's happening to the population over time? Looking at the age structure, the ethnic mix. Is migration occurring? Are people moving in or are they leaving? Looking at the family size, looking at the life expectancy of the area. They would tell us an awful lot about the success or failure of management or change. And then the economic side, looking at the type of employment. Is it changing? Is it getting better? Is it more varied? Looking at the unemployment rate, looking at the housing income, looking at the percentage of minimum wage going down, looking at the percentage on social benefits. Is it reducing? Put all of that together. Now, these are just examples. These help us to indicate whether management has been a success or not. To what extent has it been a success? And then one final way, and probably a really important way actually, and you'd have spent some time looking at this, is what we call the index of multiple deprivation, the IMD, which is a social progress measure, is the way that a society can improve their social, political and economic structures, as it says, And the index of multiple deprivation helps in showing this social progress. So, to remind yourself, go back to that website there, the geodemographics website, which links into the IMD. And what the index of multiple deprivation does very nicely is it produces these really nice visual maps, choropleth maps here. And you can see London there, 2010 on the left, 2019 on the right. And you can see by the colour coding where the most deprived areas of London are, right up to the least deprived areas. And between those two dates, you can see there is a clear difference. Things have changed in London. Different places have changed, some of them for the better, some of them for the worse. And here, bringing this back to your local and contrasting place case study from inquiry question 1, which merged into inquiry question 2, looking at Shefford and Luton, again on the index of multiple deprivation. Clear differences in the colours, both in Luton itself, in terms of areas of Luton, some areas very deprived, some areas not deprived at all, and how that's changed from 2010 to 2019. Then the same in Shefford, not much change there between the two dates, but then compare Shefford and Luton. So the index of multiple deprivation again gives you a variety of data that you can use, choropleth map data, statistics that you can look at, the 7 domains of deprivation. And what you'd have looked at here in the lesson are 3 key areas, describing which areas in the UK are deprived. Secondly, explain the key features of deprivation and the usefulness of the IMD. So how it and why is it useful? Does it have any limitations? And then evaluate how the IMD can help support management of cities and regions. So that's probably by the identification of particular issues in certain areas, then what can be done. EQ4 then looks at managing urban areas, and in particular looking at stakeholders and players. And you really have delved into a case study here. And as the learning outcome says, how has Slough, I always call it Slough in the lesson, and people get very annoyed with me, how has Slough been managed by different stakeholders and players involved? So again, bringing all of that knowledge and information together from previous lessons and bringing it into an example. And you'd first of all looked at a YouTube clip here and some images to get to grips with what are people's impressions of Slough. Are they positive? Are they negative? Reminding yourselves of what a stakeholder actually means. It's someone or a group of people or an organisation that has an interest or a concerning something that's going on in a particular place. And then in the redevelopment of an area, who would be the stakeholders? So these are just examples. If you're regenerating a place, it could be the national government and the local government, the councils, local people, businesses, specialist groups. It depends on the place, the community, and what's taking place. So you'd have gone over a bit of background to Slough, its location, where it is, the population of Slough, looking at briefly at the racial tensions there that were high, with only 34.5% being white British in Slough. There weren't, and there never has been any racial enclaves like many other cities. Communities are much more mixed in Slough. And then looking over the last 100 years, there have been a large influxes of people from Wales, Scotland and Poland, and then the growth of the Sikh and Hindu and Muslim communities living in Slough. And then, interestingly, Slough voted in favour of Brexit in 2016. So that would have been an introduction for you to Slough. And what you'd have then done is delved into the textbook and you've done some extra research looking at the changing Slough, the key players. So who were the stakeholders involved in the regeneration and solving the problems in Slough? Managing and resolving tensions. So what was actually being done? and then how was Slough being regenerated as a result of that. So revisit your notes. Again, here's some how perceptions of how 4 people felt about Slough. Again, you've got to bring people's perceptions and different stakeholder perceptions. Here's some of the information you will use to create your case study. So again, if you want to pause it here, please do. And some more. And some more. And this really is a summary of some of the key points that you'd have explained in further depth. And I would now like you to have a look at this online university lecture. This one is called Perceptions of Urban Places, Good Cities, Better Lives. So go back to the Google Drive, access this PowerPoint, click on the link, make some notes and listen to that lecture. So then exactly the same again, actually, managing rural areas this time though. Again, looking at the stakeholders and players involved in managing, and you'd have delved into Cornwall, which you looked at the start of this unit as well. So you'd have looked at Cornwall, the management of a rural area, different places in Cornwall as well. You'd have been given a range of resources to use. So your task was to look at how a rural area is managed and its different stakeholders and players. Who was doing what? Were they in favour? Were they against? The key areas here at the bottom in bold. How diverse is Cornwall? What is Cornwall like in terms of its economy? The national and local strategies being used to manage Cornwall as a rural place. What are some of the investment examples in Cornwall? And some of the key players and stakeholders involved. And here, these are some of the articles that you'd have had access to. And you'd have looked at these particular projects, the Eden project, the Superfast Broadband project. And don't forget the new key Aero Hub as well. So what you'd have also looked at, again, as I said in the instructions, are the key players. There's 6 key players in Cornwall. What were their opinions? What were they doing? Were they in favour? What do they want to happen? And that concludes your inquiry question 4. So as I usually say, do look back at this over a few times. Use this alongside your class notes, not as a standalone learning tool. Thank you very much, everybody.